Hi, this is Ted, and for the next hour, you'll be listening to a reading of articles and features from the Monday, March 2nd New York Times on the Niagara Frontier radio reading service. Before I start reading articles, I have to say I probably will not read anything with news about what's going on in Iran because that will change by the time you listen to this. And I don't want to repeat things that you're likely to have heard on television or radio. But I will start with a thoughtful essay by Thomas Friedman, How to Think About Trump's War with Iran. To think clearly about Middle East wars, you need to hold multiple thoughts in your head at the same time. It's a complicated, kaleidoscopic region where religion, oil, tribal politics, and great power politics interweave in every major story. If you're looking for a black and white narrative, you might want to take up Checkers. So here are my 4 thoughts on Iran, at least for today. First, I hope this effort to topple the clerical regime in Tehran succeeds. It's a regime that murders its people, destabilizes its neighbors, and has destroyed a great civilization. There's no single event that would do more to put the whole Middle East on a more decent, inclusive trajectory than the replacement of Tehran's Islamic regime with a leadership focused exclusively on enabling the people of Iran to realize their full potential with a real voice in their own future. Second, this will not be easy because this regime is deeply entrenched and is hardly going to be toppled from the air alone. Israel has not been able to eliminate Hamas in Gaza after over 2 years of a merciless air and ground war, and Hamas is right next door. That said, even if this U.S.-Israeli attack on Iran does not lead to the uprising by the Iranian people that Trump has urged, it could have other unanticipated beneficial effects, like producing an Islamic Republic 2.0 that is much less threatening to its people and neighbors. But it just as easily could result in unanticipated dangers, like the disintegration of Iran as a single geographic entity. Third, we must remember that the timing of the end of this war will be determined as much by the oil markets and the financial markets as by the military state of play inside Iran. Iran is on the edge of economic collapse with a currency worth little more than wallpaper. Europe has become much more dependent on liquefied natural gas from the Persian Gulf to run its economies, since phasing out purchases of natural gas from Russia. A sustained burst of inflation caused by higher energy prices would anger Trump's base, many of whom already don't like being dragged into another Middle East war. There are a lot of people who will want this war to be short, and that will impact how and when Trump and Tehran negotiate. Fourth, we must not let this war bring democracy and the rule of law to Iran, distract us from the threats to democracy and the rule of law posed by Trump in America and by Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu in Israel. Trump wants to promote those ideals in Tehran, even as his ICE agents operated for 2 months with limited regard for legal restraints in my home state of Minnesota, and as he floats ideas about restricting who can vote in our next election. If the war in Iran enables Netanyahu to win the Israeli elections planned for this year, it will be a major propellant to his efforts to annex the West Bank, cripple the Israeli Supreme Court, and make Israel an apartheid state, which would be a major blow to American interests in the region beyond Iran. Life as an opinion columnist would be easy if every war you had to take a stand on was the American Civil War and every leader was Abraham Lincoln. But they are not. So let's dig a little deeper into these 4 thoughts on Iran. While you'd never know it if you listened to the campus left in recent years, the Islamic Republic of Iran has been the biggest imperialist power in the region since 1979, cultivating proxies to control 4 Arab states, Syria, Lebanon, Iraq, and Yemen, and undermining liberal reformers in all 4 by promoting sectarian divisions. Just the weakening of the Tehran regime, thanks to Israeli and American hammer blows over the past 2 years, has led to the downfall of the Iranian-bolstered Assad regime in Syria and enabled Lebanon to escape the vice grip of the Iranian-backed Hezbollah militia, which in turn has given space for Lebanon's most decent government in decades, one led by Prime Minister Nawaf Salam and President Joseph Aoun. That is why the death of Iran's supreme leader, Ayatollah Ali Khamenei, is being quietly or loudly celebrated across the region. Also, the Iranian people are among the most naturally pro-Western in the region. If that impulse is allowed to surface and spread and replace the divisive radical Islamist poison propagated by the Iranian regime, we have the possibility for a much more inclusive Middle East. As the Lebanese Emirati strategist Nadim Kotek put it to me, it is not for nothing that one of the most popular chants of anti-regime protesters in Iran has been, "No Gaza, no Lebanon, my life for Iran." Many Iranians have been sickened to watch their resources squandered on militias fighting Israel. It is also no accident, he noted, that Iran has just launched rockets against airports, hotels, and ports of the modernizing Arab Gulf states. They are attacking the infrastructure of openness and integration in the Abraham Accords. It was the old Middle East attacking the new Middle East, he added. Khamenei's death, hopefully, is the death of Khamenei's idea that the Middle East should be defined by resistance and not by inclusion and integration. Hopefully, it will also end the double game practiced by Khamenei and his predecessors like Mohammad Ahmadinejad, who served as Iran's president from 2005 until 2013 and was also killed in an Israeli-U.S. airstrike, that Iran has the right to openly shout death to America and death to Israel, and then claim that it also has the right to be treated like Denmark or to enrich uranium for peaceful purposes. Trump and Netanyahu finally called out that game. As for the Iranian people now coming together and toppling the regime, it is hard to see that happening anytime soon without a clear leader and a common agenda. The Iranian analysts I speak to say the more likely outcome is a kind of Islamic Republic 2.0, where leading regime reformers like Hassan Rouhani, who served as the seventh president of Iran from 2013 to 2021, and has been an increasingly outspoken critic of Khamenei's hard line, or the former foreign minister and nuclear negotiator Javad Zarif, pressed the surviving leadership to negotiate a deal with Trump. That deal could be one that gives up Iran's nuclear program and accepts limits on its proxy wars and ballistic missiles, in other words, whatever Trump wants, in return for an end to economic sanctions and regime survival. Such an Islamic Republic 2.0 regime might then be able to oversee a transition to a real Iranian democracy again. But Trump could also face accusations of throwing a life preserver to a dying regime that recently killed at least 6,800 protesters, according to the US-based human rights activists news agency, and likely many more. In other words, starting this war was relatively easy. Ending it will not be. Such a deal might be tempting to Trump, though, to avoid a prolonged war, a recession triggered by soaring oil prices, or the disintegration of Iran, which is why I was not surprised to hear Trump tell The Atlantic, "They want to talk and I have agreed to talk, so I will be talking to them." As this column has noted before, in the Middle East, the opposite of autocracy is not necessarily democracy. Often, it is disorder. Because when Middle East dictatorships are decapitated, one of two things happens. They either implode, like Libya did, or they explode, like Syria did. Persians are only around 60% of Iran's population. The other 40% is a mosaic of minorities, mainly Azeris, Kurds, Lurs, Arabs, and Balak. Each has links with lands outside of Iran, especially Azeris with Azerbaijan and Kurds with Kurdistan. Prolonged chaos in Tehran could lead any of them to split off, and for Iran, too, in effect, explode. Iran has witnessed the collapse of governments or the fall of rulers throughout its history. Every time Iran stayed intact, said Kotek, for the first time I'm not sure it will stay intact. If you want to see $150 a barrel oil, that kind of Iranian disintegration would take you there. Iran's oil exports of 1.6 million barrels a day, which go mostly to China, would be taken completely off the global oil market. Some 20% of all global oil trade moves through the Straits of Hormuz, which Iran can shut down. Insurance rates for oil shippers are already skyrocketing, and some 150 tankers in the Gulf are reportedly frozen in place. Meanwhile, over in Beijing, President Xi Jinping has to be wondering how his weapon systems would stack up against the U.S. supplied ones to Taiwan, having seen U.S.-made fighter planes and smart missiles easily evade or destroy Iran's Russian-supplied anti-aircraft systems and assassinate much of Iran's national security elite in their homes and offices. Maybe this is not the week to invade Taiwan, or even next week. It might be a good week, though, for Beijing to look at all the Iranian people spontaneously dancing in the streets to celebrate the death of Khamenei and ask if the People's Republic of China should have been propping up his regime with oil purchases all these years. Maybe it should have been on the side of the Iranian people. It's way too early to predict how this war will affect two critical 2026 elections, one in Israel and one in the US. For Trump, it's simple. He doesn't want to see the word quagmire in any headline with his name in it ahead of the midterms in November. As for Netanyahu, I could imagine him calling for early elections to use the downfall of the Iranian regime to keep himself in power. But victory over Iran could also complicate his politics. Netanyahu has notched short-term military defeats over Hamas, Islamic Jihad, Hezbollah, and Iran, but he has not translated a single one of them into long-term diplomatic or political gains. To do so would require him to agree to negotiate again with the Palestinians based on a framework of two states for two people. The opportunity for Israel could be enormous. If the Islamic Republic of Iran is either toppled or defanged, I have little doubt that Saudi Arabia, Lebanon, Syria, Oman, Qatar, Kuwait, and maybe even Iraq would feel much more comfortable normalizing relations with Israel, on the condition that Netanyahu does not annex Gaza or the West Bank, but agrees instead to a plan for separation and a two-state solution. Would Netanyahu rise to that opportunity? Would Israeli voters punish him if he does not? But I get ahead of myself. I expect by Wednesday there will be at least 3 more points competing in my head to make sense of it all, because this is the most plastic, unpredictable moment in the Middle East since the Iranian Revolution in 1979. Everything and its opposite is possible. And on a change of subject, an essay by Margaret Rankel, The Glorious Birds We Saved. I probably wouldn't have made the drive to Wheeler National Wildlife Refuge in North Alabama back in January if I hadn't gotten an email bearing this subject line, whooping cranes. The message came from Nicole Mashburn, a board member of the Wheeler Wildlife Refuge Association and the friend of a friend. Out of abject necessity, I ignore 90% of the emails I get, even emails from friends of friends, but put whooping cranes in the subject line and you have me. I thought you might like to know we have 18 whooping cranes this year, Ms. Mashburn wrote. I don't keep a life list of birds I've seen or go to any length to see rare birds, but the whooping crane is more than simply rare and more than simply beautiful. It's a rare and beautiful bird that still exists because human beings decided a long time ago that it should exist. Wheeler is a sprawling 35,000-acre sanctuary along the Tennessee River, and its wetland habitats offer ideal wintering grounds for migratory waterfowl of many types. It's always worth the drive to Wheeler in winter because of the magnificent sandhill cranes that overwinter there every year. Gathering by the tens of thousands, they talk to one another continuously in a joyful, burbling call that always makes me think an odd sort of marching band is tuning up with instruments I don't recognize. Quick pause. You're listening to a reading of articles and features from the New York Times on the Niagara Frontier Radio Reading Service. But I've already seen the glorious flock of sandhills at Wheeler, and I was in the midst of an uncommonly busy winter. So I probably wouldn't have made the trip again this year if not for Ms. Mashburn's email about the whooping cranes. Those majestic white birds are the tallest in America, each standing 5 feet tall, with a wingspan of nearly 7 feet, and we almost lost them forever. Never known to exist in large numbers, whooping cranes were nonetheless geographically widespread in North America until farming and hunting pushed them to the brink of extinction. By 1941, the worldwide population of whooping cranes numbered barely more than 20. But nearly that many were stalking around in the flooded fields of the Wheeler Wildlife Refuge in January, less than 2 hours from my house. My husband and I made plans to head down and see if we could find them. Even after decades of intense effort to help the species rebound through a combination of habitat conservation and an innovative breeding and release program, the total population of whooping cranes today is only around 800. So if you're a whooping crane, you need a flock for safety. You throw in your lot with the much more numerous sandhills. Thomas Ress, a Wheeler board member, longtime volunteer, and the author of Wheeler National Wildlife Refuge, told us how to figure out which local predators are targeting the flock. If all of a sudden you see the ducks rise up, there's a good chance there's an eagle nearby. If you see all the sandhills rise up, there's a good chance there's a coyote going through the field. But coyotes aren't the whooping crane's greatest danger, or the sandhills either. The Trump administration's unceasing assault on environmental protections threatens to undo decades of conservation efforts on behalf of whooping cranes and every other threatened or endangered species. I wondered if this might be my only real chance to see a whooping crane in the wild. The thing about trying to find a whooping crane tucked among a vast flock of sandhills in a vast wildlife refuge is that sandhills are also giant birds, and in certain light, like for example the light reflected from water on a sunny day, it's not easy to tell whether a bird is a pale gray sandhill or whether it's a white whooping crane. My husband and I stood behind one of the several bird blinds at Wheeler and debated, is that a whooper? Is that one? Then someone pointed to the far right of the viewing area, and there they were, 2 whooping cranes walking calmly among the sandhills. As it turns out, when you see a whooping crane, you cannot doubt that you're seeing one. No other living thing like it exists in all the world. It's like seeing something from myth. It's like stepping backward onto an earth as yet untouched by human hands. In that instant, I learned that I didn't need to see Wheeler's whooping cranes out of fear that I'd otherwise miss my chance. I needed to see them to remember what my own species is capable of. To see a whooping crane in the wild is to be reminded that we nearly killed something miraculous. And then, almost unbelievably, we didn't. Against all evidence to the contrary, we are as much the healing species as the murdering one. The question is whether we still have the wisdom to save what we have the ability to save. Back when a bipartisan effort by Congress saved the bald eagle and the peregrine falcon, when it protected our water and our air and set up a mechanism for protecting our most valuable species, we did. I would not have believed it possible even then, with the country in nearly the same turmoil the country is in now. But we did. It was President Richard Nixon who signed into law the Clean Air Act, the Marine Mammal Protection Act, and the Endangered Species Act. President Nixon who established the Environmental Protection Agency. He did these things because voters, newly awake to what they were on the precipice of losing forever, insisted on saving what could yet be saved. Surely there's room now, too, even amid so many other fights, to protect what we love, to protect the living world that sustains our wild neighbors. the living world that sustains us too. For us, it's personal. If we lose our wetlands, we will have lost our best chance for absorbing storm surges in a time of extreme weather patterns. If our water is unsafe for amphibians, it's unsafe for us too. When the air we breathe is full of toxins, wild creatures are not the only ones to suffer. At a species level, it is nothing less than suicidal to believe that human beings are exempt from the ravages that human beings keep subjecting the earth to. But the living world also sustains us in ways we hardly recognize until we have been deprived of it for too long. The feel of turned soil in our hands, the scent of flowers on a breeze, the sound of birdsong pouring down from the trees. This is the world we evolved in, the world we were born for. Lately, my brother and I have been visiting schools and bookstores to read from our new picture book about the many lives a wildflower garden sustains. Small hands always shoot up when we ask if there are any questions, but rarely do the children ask questions. They prefer instead to tell us about the creatures they love. I like squirrels, one preschooler said when we called on her. I like butterflies, another said when it was his turn. These little ones were already all in. I like worms, I like birds, I like ladybugs, I like bunnies. They reminded me of a child I met at Wheeler National Wildlife Refuge late in the day when we went to see the cranes. Peering through a cutout in one of the bird blinds, the toddler leaned forward to see the birds as they were just beginning to lift off at sunset. Wow, he whispered amid the rush of wings. Oh, wow. And back to the war. Fact-checking Trump's justifications for attacking Iran by Linda Q. President Trump, in announcing a military campaign against Iran early Saturday, asserted he had done so because of, quote, imminent threats posed by the regime. He laid out his justifications in an 8-minute video he shared on social media. But 3 of his key claims, blaming Iran for terrorist attack in 2000, characterizing its nuclear program as destroyed by previous American strikes, and warning that its weapons could soon reach the United States, were inaccurate. Here's a fact check. What he said: in 2000, they knew and were probably involved with the attack on the USS Cole. This lacks evidence. Al-Qaeda claimed responsibility for the October 2000 attack on the U.S. destroyer Cole, and American intelligence agencies have concurred. There is no public evidence that Iran was directly responsible for the attack. But for years, U.S. courts have ordered Iran to pay tens of millions of dollars in damages to victims of the attack and their survivors, finding that Iran facilitated the attack by providing material and financial support to al-Qaeda. The FBI, on its website detailing the history of the attack, notes that the agency ultimately determined that members of the al-Qaeda terrorist network planned and carried out the bombing. It makes no mention of Iran. Abd al-Rahim al-Nashiri, a citizen of Saudi Arabia, is accused of organizing the attack and is currently awaiting trial at Guantanamo Bay. A federal judge ruled in 2015 that Iran was complicit, knowing that the country's support for al-Qaeda made it capable of carrying out the attack on Cole, and that one of the masterminds most likely traveled through Iran before and after the bombing. The case was brought by the family of a sailor killed in the attack against Iran and Sudan. Neither country responded to the lawsuit. In a similar civil case, a federal judge ruled in 2024 that Iran facilitated the planning and execution of the attack on the Cole through decades of material support to al-Qaeda. What was said? This is why in Operation Midnight Hammer last June, we obliterated the regime's nuclear program at Fardal, Natanz, and Isfahan. This is exaggerated. The United States last June carried out airstrikes targeting Iran's nuclear facilities, but government reports and other officials have not gone so far as Mr. Trump's claims of total destruction. The New York Times reported in the days after the attack that a preliminary assessment found that the strikes had sealed off the entrances to 2 of Iran's facilities, but had not collapsed their underground buildings. John Ratcliffe, the CIA director, said last June that Iran's nuclear program had been severely damaged by the airstrikes. Rafael Grossi, the Director General of the International Atomic Energy Agency, told CBS that same month that the strikes caused severe damage, but it's not total damage. And a Pentagon spokesman echoed that language last August, telling reporters that the strikes had severely degraded Iran's capability and set back the program by 2 years. The administration, too, took a more muted approach in assessing the damage. In the National Security Strategy published last November with an introduction by the president, officials stated that the June airstrikes significantly degraded Iran's nuclear program. What he said. Instead, they attempted to rebuild their nuclear program and to continue developing long-range missiles that can now threaten our very good friends and allies in Europe, our troops stationed overseas, and could soon reach the American homeland. This lacks evidence. Officials with access to U.S. intelligence told the New York Times that Mr. Trump exaggerated the immediacy of the threat posed to the United States by Iran's missiles program. The suggestion that Iran was trying to build a nuclear bomb was also unsupported. Trump is correct that the country's current missile arsenal could reach parts of Europe and U.S. military bases in the Middle East, but experts and officials' reports doubt that Iran's missiles could reach the U.S. According to a 2025 report from the Defense Intelligence Agency, Iran did not have intercontinental ballistic missiles that could reach the U.S., though it could develop 60 such weapons by 2035. There's also little evidence that Iran is trying to build a bomb. Mr. Grossi told a French news network this week that his agency had not seen evidence that Iran had plans to produce a nuclear weapon. Officials also told the New York Times this week that Iran had not built new nuclear sites since the June attacks, though recent activity has been detected at existing sites. Nor was there evidence that Iran was trying to dig out its stash of enriched uranium. There is no imminent threat, said Darrell Kimball, the executive director of the Arms Control Association. Iran is not close to weaponizing its nuclear material so as to justify another U.S. attack. And another change of pace. After Priceless Violin flies on lap, Lufthansa changes carry-on rules. By Christine Hauser. The German violinist Caroline Widmann played in a concerto. She didn't play in a concerto, she played in a concert in Finland in November and set off for a quick trip home before a performance in Vienna. But at the airport in Helsinki, she was faced with a conundrum: what to do with her centuries-old violin. As she tried to board a Lufthansa flight, an airline employee said that her violin case was too long to fit in the cabin. Despite her protests, the only option for transporting the multi-million-dollar instrument was to remove it, buy a second seat on the flight to Frankfurt, and hold it on the connecting flight to Leipzig, her hometown. Ms. Widmann had to protect the instrument, a Giovanni Battista Guadagnini violin made in Turin, Italy in 1782, from the risks of spills, jostling passengers, and turbulence in multiple planes, as well as through security checks and bus transfers in the ice and snow. I took off my sweater and wrapped the sweater around my violin, Ms. Widmann, 49, said in an interview. Completely unprotected, this incredibly valuable instrument. She could not leave it unattended to use the restroom. This is more than an instrument, she said. It is a cultural heritage. It is like having a Van Gogh painting bare in your hands. Ms. Widmann, who travels for up to 60 concerts a year, filed a complaint with the Lufthansa station manager at Helsinki Airport in Finland, and through the Lufthansa airline group's website, she said. She published an open letter to its chief executive, Carsten Spohr, spoke with management, and kept track of her efforts on social media, where thousands of musicians replied with support or shared similar stories. By February, as Ms. Widmann described it, her ordeal had struck a chord. As of March 1st, Lufthansa Group, citing customer feedback, said it would be applying a new, more generous carry-on policy for small instruments such as violins, trumpets, or ukuleles. The change means that the entire dimensions of the hand luggage, its height, width, and depth, cannot exceed 125 centimeters when added together. This means that instruments longer than the regular maximum length of 55 centimeters can also be taken on board, said Lufthansa in an email. For Ms. Widmann's violin case, the 80 centimeter length alone was used to determine its viability in the cabin. Lufthansa's policy change is part of efforts by the airline industry to address the challenges musicians face when flying. In a meeting of European Parliament members, musicians, and aviation executives in Brussels on February 23rd, Nicola Zingaretti, the Italian head of the Democratic Party, said Ms. Widmann's experience showed how a single incident can become a catalyst for change. Musical instruments are not normal luggage, he told the meeting. But unifying regulations would be a complex task, considering the multiple airports, ground staff, and airlines across the bloc. The problem is not just around the policies, said David Webster of the British Museums Union. It is around the understanding of the policies and how we educate gate staff. Valentina Sheldhofen-Chardelli, a double bass musician and composer who initiated the meeting with Parliament members, presented a petition signed by more than 8,200 independent and orchestral musicians from around the world that seeks clear rules about the transport of instruments and less discretionary applications of them. She said that she protested last month when an official at London's Stansted Airport tried to open the case holding her bows, which are delicate and can be altered by the fabric of gloves or the natural oil of a person's hand. If you open an instrument case, you compromise the function of the instrument itself, Ms. Sheldhofen-Chardelli said in an interview. It could move or fall down. It's really like managing a piece of art. And you're listening to a reading of articles and features from the New York Times on the Niagara Frontier Radio Reading Service. Ms. Sheldhofen-Chardelli and the union collaborated on new regulations that were adopted at Heathrow Airport in London in August, allowing musicians to handle their instrument cases during inspections. This demonstrates that meaningful change is possible without compromising security standards, she said. Ms. Widmann said that it was a lack of uniform regulations that made her experience so unusual in Finland, where a ground and airline staff approached with a measuring tape. She relented by removing the violin and checking the case with only her bows, still worth tens of thousands of dollars. I don't want to break the rules, she said, but it's not enough to say that it won't happen again. Sampo Palkari, the managing director of AirPro, which handles aviation services in Helsinki, said passengers must choose from existing policy options when issues arise with their luggage. We understand that transporting valuable instruments on an aircraft can be stressful for a passenger, and we do our best to ensure everything goes well. However, we cannot deviate from the airline's instructions on a case-by-case basis. As the Strad, a music publication and news organizations, including in Finland and Italy, spread Ms. Widmann's story, it resonated with the international community of musicians who carry, wheel, and stow instruments on airplanes, buses, and trains. Musicians share tips online about how to travel, particularly on airplanes with their instruments, from the unwieldy like a saxophone or horn to the oversized like a cello. Many instruments barely fit as carry-on items or don't fit at all, and they're invariably fragile. In the U.S., musicians are advised to check with airlines about large items, said a spokesperson for the Transportation Security Administration. Brass instruments must be in checked bags, while violins, drumsticks, and guitars can be carried on after hand inspection. Musicians can ask via TSA Cares for a supervisor to be involved in advance of their flight. If someone's traveling with a literally priceless violin, the anxiety of that process is significant. Lucas Phillips, a musician in Massachusetts, said that he had worked out a way domestically to transport his double bass, which is over 5 feet tall. In his Toyota Camry sedan, he tilts the front seat, slides the instrument in, and turns it so that the bottom rests on the dashboard. But the complications of traveling have discouraged him from touring abroad. The last time he did so, he borrowed a bass for a jazz festival in Panama rather than risk taking his own. When transiting through Newark Liberty International Airport, his companions were told to check their saxophones. They refused. A captain intervened, and they eventually found space in the cabin, he said. No musician in their right mind would let their instrument be checked, he said. Another opinion piece. The big problem with tariffs isn't the rates, it's the corruption. This is by Shane Ball and Kimberly Klausing. President Trump is resurrecting his tariffs after a Supreme Court ruling that struck down many of those he levied during his first year back in office. This means higher costs for American consumers and businesses and more economic uncertainty. What's worse, these new tariffs will enable more preference peddling on the part of Trump and his administration, tilting the economic playing field toward large and well-connected businesses. Trump still has plenty of tariff-setting authorities to exercise, and he has shown that he will play favorites when given the chance. To some extent, businesses always seek to curry favor with legislators and government officials, but ideally they would spend little time and money doing so. Pouring resources into lobbying or potentially even bribery diverts resources away from productive investments and towards supplication, which can hurt the economy and change the nature of competition itself. When the company's profits depend on political connections, smaller firms lose out, and the market can't adequately reward risk-taking, entrepreneurship, and innovation. The overall result is weaker economic growth. To fight favoritism, Congress has imposed guardrails, such as empowering independent civil servants to make decisions on regulations, enforcement, and government contracting. Some executive branch decisions are also subject to judicial review. In some areas, though, Congress has delegated flexible authorities to the president, and tariff setting is one of them. Lobbying increased dramatically when Trump levied his previous battery of tariffs. Politically connected firms received exemptions, and the dollar amount of tariff exemptions skyrocketed. Before Trump's second term, hardly any U.S. imports were exempted from tariffs. By December, 51% of imports were exempt. There is now even a tariff inclusion process through which firms can lobby for new tariffs on their competitors. The Commerce Department has approved a slew of petitions. The lobbying will persist. In its recent ruling, the Supreme Court considered only one of the tariff-setting authorities Trump has claimed. Others give the president wide discretion too, even if they require more process or come with time limits. Tariff laws known as Section 232 of the Trade Expansion Act of 1962 and Section 301 of the Trade Act of 1974 require the administration to build a formal case before the president can impose any new tariffs. Senior presidential appointees make these reports. They will almost certainly greenlight the tariffs Trump wants, and exemption seeking will continue apace. A study of Section 301 exemptions granted in Trump's first term shows that firms connected to the administration or to the Republican Party were more likely to be granted exemptions. Other laws grant sole discretion to the president, such as Section 122 of the Trade Act of 1974, the basis for the tariff Trump announced after the court's decision came down. This is the first use of Section 122 authority, so it's unclear how courts will respond to legal challenges, and the tariffs imposed under this law may last only 150 days, unless Congress extends them. But the statute still appears to give the president leeway. Since Trump retains the final say on whether a tariff is imposed and who or what is exempted, businesses still have reason to seek the president's favor. Uncertainty will make companies only more determined to get an inside track. Norms against lobbying and corruption have surely eroded after nearly a year of tariffs and, more broadly, of the pay-to-play dynamics visible across Trump's administration. In return for export licenses, the administration has extracted fees from NVIDIA in the form of a profit-sharing agreement with the government, seemingly violating a law that Trump signed in 2018 that bans charging fees for such licenses. The administration waived restrictions on exports to the United Arab Emirates, just as an Emirati company made a large investment in a cryptocurrency firm owned by the families of Trump and Steve Witkoff, the president's special envoy to the Middle East. Both sides have denied any quid pro quo, but the timing of the policy change raises questions. The administration has struck agreements giving the government ownership stakes in businesses or rights to their profits. Trump has called for chief executives and corporate board members to be removed and made extraordinary demands of law firms, universities, state and local governments, and even many foreign governments. Some administration officials appear to be profiting from their public positions, whether through government contracts, cryptocurrency, or even potentially Venezuelan oil. Combined with the Trump administration's evisceration of white-collar criminal and tax enforcement, the message is clear. Businesses that pay for influence might be rewarded. Many factors contribute to the long-standing success of the American economy. An essential one is its institutions' resistance to corruption. Economies where corruption is endemic have a poor track record. Trump's erosion of the distinction between public power and private gain imperils the foundation of both American prosperity and liberty. The Supreme Court has done its part, and federal lawmakers need to do theirs. Until Congress reasserts its constitutional authority over tariffs and other policy matters, the institutional decline and corruption enabled by Trump's agenda will continue. And here's something else to keep an eye on. This is an essay by Anna Zauerbrey, who was a German journalist, and the article is entitled, "Germany's Chancellor is in Washington? It gets worse." On Monday, Chancellor Friedrich Merz of Germany touches down in Washington for a two-day visit. There's a lot to discuss with Trump: the bruised transatlantic relationship, the confusion around tariffs, the brutal war in Ukraine, and the new military campaign in Iran. He might be grilled about his trip to China last week, too. For someone less than a year in the job, it's a mighty undertaking. But Mr. Merz has bigger problems than Trump. With low approval ratings, an ailing economy, and the far right on the rise, his chancellorship is in choppy waters. To make matters worse, this is a big election year in Germany, with 5 of the country's 16 states going to the polls. The Alternative for Germany, or AfD, is poised to make advances, perhaps even taking control of a regional government for the first time. The danger is enormous. For Mr. Merz and his party, the Christian Democrats, it presents a serious challenge. Since becoming the major force in the coalition government last spring, they have often seemed nervous, panicked, and riddled with self-doubt. Their offering to the public has generally lacked both style and substance. But with the Social Democrats, the coalition's junior party, in election decline, it's up to the Christian Democrats to check the far-right charge. The future of German democracy is in their hands. Their tendency to chase after the Alternative for Germany, rather than repel it, does not bode too well. During the election campaign early last year, an immigrant killed 2 and injured more in an attack in Bavaria. In response, Mr. Merz, leading in the polls, pushed through anti-immigrant measures that relied on votes from the AfD. The uproar was immediate. Politicians, including fellow Christian Democrats, lambasted Merz for his willingness to work with the far right, breaching the firewall that has kept it at bay. Once Mr. Merz was in office, things didn't get much better. In October, the country's foreign minister, Johann Wadephul, traveled to Syria for the first time since the fall of Bashar al-Assad. After visiting a heavily damaged suburb of Damascus, he questioned whether Syrians living in Germany would want to return, something many Christian Democrats were demanding. Again, there was uproar. Mr. Wadephul was accused of undermining the party's strict stance on migration and capitulating to out-of-date liberalism. The infighting was ugly. These episodes are part of a wider convergence. In recent years, Germany has steadily shifted right. Migration policies that would have been unthinkable a few years ago, such as pushbacks at the border or restrictions on family reunifications, now find broad support in the political mainstream. At the same time, the AfD is trying to appear more moderate, with some figures suggesting that the party drop its call for remigration and tamp down its more extreme conduct. When it comes to migration today, the center and the far right are increasingly hard to distinguish. The AfD plans to exploit this blurring of the lines. Last summer, my newspaper, Die Zeit, got its hands on an internal party strategy paper. It laid out a roadmap for how the AfD could become strong enough to govern nationally by 2029, when the next general election is due. The plan goes like this: split the center by pushing the Social Democrats to the left and the Christian Democrats to the right. Meanwhile, show openness to working with the Christian Democrats, portraying yourself as a fellow conservative party. The Christian Democrats mustn't fall for it. In an encouraging sign, Mr. Merz unequivocally ruled out any partnership with the AfD at his party's Congress last month. There were also proposals to support a social media ban for children, stimulate investment, and cut red tape. This focus on what matters most to Germans, especially the troubled economy, is a step in the right direction. But Christian Democrats must define who they are too. To do so, it may be useful to revive a word that was long key to German conservatism: bürgerlich. Bürger means citizen, like the category of person in pre-modern Germany who, though not aristocratic, was free to participate in public life. Within their cities, citizens could assume office and govern. A sense of self-determination and civic responsibility is still attached to the term, which nowadays means belonging to the middle class and adhering to a certain set of values. The positive attributes associated with it are decency, civility, integrity, composure, and moderation. And you're listening to a reading of articles and features from the New York Times on the Niagara Frontier radio reading service. The AfD claims to be bürgerlich too, but for the most part it evokes the negative connotations of the term: conformism, self-satisfaction, and contempt for others. The party is full of disdain for perceived outsiders, not only immigrants, but also welfare recipients. For many AfD politicians, restoring order really means creating an ethnically homogeneous society. To see that there is nothing civil or moderate about them, you need only listen to their speeches or follow their social media channels. On the world stage, Mr. Merz has proved capable. He has resisted Trump's depredations, corralled allies in defense of Ukraine, pushed for greater European cooperation, and navigated a complicated relationship with China, demonstrating calm and poise throughout. Now he must be similarly proactive at home. Against the AfD's appropriation, he and the country's conservatives must reclaim bürgerlich and properly embody it. An unassuming bronze statue on a street corner in Berlin encapsulates the stakes. It's a memorial to Walter Liebke, a local politician who was shot and killed by a right-wing extremist in 2019. The attacker reportedly supported the AfD and attended party events. Set beside the headquarters of the Christian Democrats, the statue is a warning that the line between conservatism and far-right extremism must never be crossed. Mr. Merz would do well, while in Washington, to heed it. And finally, an essay by Frank Bruni called "Will a Peacock Like Gavin Newsom Fly?" President Trump sucks up so much oxygen that there's often little left for other politicians, but lately Governor Gavin Newsom of California has been getting a hefty share of spare air. That's partly because of his just-published memoir, Young Man in a Hurry, which he has been promoting relentlessly. But it's also because he's such a practiced peacock. He knows how to strut. Newsom's manner of plumage and magnitude of ambition have typically turned me off. They're a warning. Here's a bird with too much ego or insecurity, a creature who craves affirmation too keenly and chases it too furiously to hold on to principle. But these days, there's more competition for attention than ever, more noise. Can someone conflicted about the spectacle of campaigning and the grind of the presidency, a normal human making a nuanced plea in a measured voice, prevail in an all-caps age? I don't know. But it's a question we need to consider as various Democrats intensify their auditions for 2028. The casting call has certainly begun. A month before Newsom released Young Man in a Hurry, Josh Shapiro, the governor of Pennsylvania, released Where We Keep the Light, a book in which he, too, invites the kind of biographical examination that shouts presidential aspirations. Maybe both Democrats got the writing bug at the same time, or maybe they looked at their calendars, realized that speculation about 2028 would grow a whole lot louder right about now, and decided to lay down their markers. Representative Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez, Democrat of New York, shares their sense of timing. About 2 weeks ago, she jetted off to Germany, and it wasn't for pretzels and beer. It was for the Munich Security Conference and an opportunity to signal the kind of interest in foreign policy that serves a contender for higher office well. Newsom, Shapiro, and Ocasio-Cortez belong to a plethora of potential contestants for the Democratic presidential nomination, and from this point forward, those of us desperate for a winner, for whoever's the best bet to contain Trumpism and steer this country back to a better track, will be sizing up the possibilities ever more closely. But the criteria for judgment and the dynamics feel different than in elections past. At least for me, they do. In the before times, I was very wary of candidates whose quest for the presidency seemed too insistent and all-consuming, who had been nursing the dream for too long and clinging to it too tightly. I worried that any such single-mindedness erased any space for subtlety, for introspection, for ambivalence, for the crucially instructive mess of an unscripted life. And would voters relate to it? Part of what drew many Democrats I know to Barack Obama was that he seemed to be working through decidedly mixed feelings about his quest for the presidency, as most well-adjusted people would be. Part of what drew many Republicans I know to George W. Bush was that he seemed less comfortable on the campaign trail than on his ranch. It was a Goldilocks thing. Too little ardor for the White House was a non-starter, given the slog to get there. Too much could be a turnoff, given how cold and calculated it can make someone. But a longing at once robust and restrained, that was just right. Newsom seems entirely unrestrained and wholly immodest, his confession of a 960 on his SAT notwithstanding. He has long struck me that way. I routinely flash back to a staggeringly vainglorious article and photo shoot in Harper's Bazaar that he and his first wife, Kimberly Guilfoyle, consented to in 2004 when he was the mayor of San Francisco. The New Kennedys, that was the article's title, and the couple's many comely poses included one in which they were stretched out together, spooning essentially, on a fancy rug in a gilded room with a Pacific panorama behind them. While I once considered that image a political liability, now I'm not so sure. Yes, it reeks of self-love, but it also announces that he came to play, that he's ready to rule. It's a positively Trumpian promise of dominance. Maybe that's what Democrats feel they need. A survey that Emerson College polling released last week put Newsom ahead of other possible Democratic presidential candidates. He got the support of 20% of likely Democratic voters. Pete Buttigieg, the former transportation secretary, finished second with 16%, while former Vice President Kamala Harris was third with 13%, and Ocasio-Cortez fourth with 9%. Meanwhile, prediction markets, which tend to reflect conventional wisdom, give Newsom a big early lead among Democrats, and he was the first pick in a fantasy-style draft of potential Democratic presidential candidates that Nate Silver participated in and discussed with the Times recently. I fear that in a general election, Newsom could be badly hobbled by some of the more progressive positions that he has taken as governor of California, and by the ease with which the state can be caricatured as crushingly expensive theater of regulatory excesses. California lost population between July 24 and July 25, as more people left it than left any other state. I can't tell where he'd land policy-wise as a president because on taxes, trans rights, and other issues, he has sent confusing signals over recent years. And I generally prefer politicians who fly at a less flamboyant attitude with a better ear for how Americans of less privilege live. Two Democratic governors confronted blowback for dining out in groups during a period of the pandemic when they were instructing constituents to avoid large public gatherings. Newsom, who ate at the vaunted French Laundry in the Napa Valley, and Gretchen Whitmer, who ate at a bar and grill in East Lansing, Michigan, the state she leads. That contrast flatters her. But Newsom's strut is working for him. It goes hand in hand with his undeniable talent for picking fights, be it his feud with Ron DeSantis, the Florida governor, about 2 years ago, His successful battle last year to redraw the congressional map in California, or his continued popular mockery of Trump on social media. Let Bernie Sanders orate about oligarchy. Newsom's a meme machine. Still, it's much too early to tell if that's what it'll take in 2028. But if the Newsom way of looking, but if the Newsom way is looking like the surest path to a post-Trump future, I'm happy to head in that direction. And you've been listening to a reading of articles and features from the New York Times on the Niagara Frontier Radio Reading Service. This is Ted. I was happy to do this, and I look forward to talking to you next week. Be well.